collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
This week's programme is all about the economy in the wake of the first ever report on the island's competitiveness, prepared by the Economy and Competitiveness Council, that concluded that our business sector is not particularly dynamic and identified skill mismatches despite a highly educated population.
Despite the fact that we are very, very high on university graduates percentage-wise with other countries, we are very poor on IT graduates. So we have to improve the IT because there is a demand. So the market is there, parents, children have to study the opportunities that they may have in the future, and IT is the sector to be.
A report was recently published by the Cyprus Competitiveness Council, and its chairman is Takis Klerides. He joins us on this week's programme because it was fairly critical, I think, of the way Cyprus is approaching its competitiveness. And of course, in today's global market, that's of prime importance to any country, particularly probably small ones, if they want to have a successful economy. Takis Klerides, of course, is a former Finance Minister of the Republic as well. So, Takis, let's start with why the Council was set up, because it's fairly recent, I think.
Correct. The Council of Economy and Competitiveness, as it is called, was established in June 18, so it's about a year ago, and it was a result of some suggestions by the European Union for similar bodies to be established in member countries. So Cyprus was amongst relatively the first ones to establish such a council. Now we have about 20 councils across Europe, so we don't have all the 28 still, but I think all of them are planning to do so. The council was formed, as I said, in June 18 with the main task of monitoring the competitiveness of Cyprus vis-à-vis other countries and suggesting practical ways to the government to improve its position for sustainable growth for the economy. Sustainable, we mean that continues, not a one-off.
Not a quick peak. You want a continuous curve.
Correct. So this is what the duties of the Council are. And I think if we can come to the competitiveness report, which was released last month, it started being prepared before the establishment of the Council. This was supported by the European Union, and it was financed by the European Union as well, and it was given to a firm of consultants from the Netherlands called Ecoris, and they prepared the report. Since our establishment as a council, we have monitored and worked together with Ecoris in order for this report to be prepared. So we have our input in that report, we have adopted it, and one of our plans is to update on an annual or biannual basis this report. So this is a report that will not stay on the shelves, but this will be monitored to see how the improvements have taken place, if any. I'm sure there will be some improvements. And we will be suggesting ways to the government, to the Minister of Finance mainly, to adopt certain measures so that Cyprus' competitiveness in Europe and globally will improve.
What were the criteria that were looked at to establish this base report? Because there are so many different sectors, and I think a lot of them are interconnected. So it's very difficult, isn't it, to pinpoint a particular thing that doesn't impact on something else?
I think whatever you look at, it has an impact on the economy. So the consultants, they have used the same criteria that they have used in many other reports. In fact, 150 indicators have been used which cover a wide spectrum of economy and business. I will explain a little bit on the main sectors as they have been classified in the report. I will mention the main weaknesses that they have been identified and the strong points we have, because it's not all weaknesses. And we take this report as a tool to improve the competitiveness of Cyprus. It's not a report which will give a bad mark or a good mark to the economy and competitiveness in Cyprus, but it's a tool to improve by monitoring and accepting the weaknesses that Cyprus has in the business sector generally.
So what are the indicators?
Okay, the indicators could be classified into basically 6 areas. The first area is the entrepreneurship and the firm, the business dynamism that one could find out. The second sector is the business linkages and the intervention of the government vis-à-vis the business. The adoption of new technologies, digitalization these days, where I can say, and I can expand later on, that Cyprus is relatively poor. The fourth element is the easy access to finance for business. And going on to the fifth is the human resources. And here we are going to talk about the mismatch of qualifications of the Cypriots generally, moving to the new era, especially in information technology. And lastly, this has been discussed as well, it can be taken for granted, is the connectivity with the outside world. If I can start with the entrepreneurship of Cyprus, is that we have generally a small number of businesses, and the businesses are small anyway because of the market that we have. We are not talking about the 60-odd million of the United Kingdom or the 11 millions of Greece, but just under 1 million people. So,
may I interrupt there, because you talk about technology as well, and of course we are in a global market. Mm-hmm. So even if you're a small business in Cyprus, if it's the right business, you can do business through the internet across the world.
That's a small element of the business, although growing, and it impacts generally the business in Cyprus. That's why we can see more and more people, and you have to accept this, and the businesses have to realize that now there is an international trade. More and more young people are ordering goods from the internet, either from Cyprus or mainly from overseas. And why they do this? I think generally because they can find goods which are cheaper than what they are being offered in Cyprus. So this is part of the weakness that we have in the digital era as well, but also a big improvement or a big plus, I would say, for the consumer generally. This is a small element. Obviously, this is touching not only in Cyprus, but everywhere. I mean, you can see even in the States that they are ordering from one state to another state because it could be lower, though there is international competition on this aspect. But let me go back on the number on the businesses generally and say that they have expensive transactions like customs. They have to import goods, they have to go and clear goods and put them and pay duties or pay the VAT and so on. These are difficulties that they are not encountered in that respect in many other countries, mainly European. But we also have some good positive benefits, like the generally low level of taxation compared to other countries. There is generally, at least in the last few years after the crisis, there is a balance of good relations between employers and employees and trade unions, something which was not sort of experienced in the past. We had really difficult times with trade unions and employers, but thank God in the last 5 years this is recognized as a positive sign.
And sticking with technology for a moment, you mentioned
Yes.
the Finance Minister, Haris Georgiadis, our Minister, is very, very keen on blockchain. Now, what impact is that going to have apropos of the competitiveness, because there are lots of advantages, but there are possibly a few disadvantages too.
There are advantages with blockchain, and we cannot ignore it. We must sort of study it very carefully, but there are also risks that have to be protected or eliminated from any legislation that we are going to have. But we cannot delay it. I think it's a matter of moving quickly to new technologies like blockchain or like other things that I can mention later on. Internet. We believe, and I know because the study says so, having compared with other countries, that we have high cost of internet and relatively low speeds. We have not improved on this aspect, and this is something that we have to take very seriously. And also, since we are talking about information technology and digital era, we must make sure that this goes down to schooling ages. We can say that our kids at school, they have improved compared to the older generation, but still the capabilities that they have to be acquired by our school children, they have to be improved. The rest of the world does not stay still waiting for us to catch up. They are moving ahead, so our speed would have to be accelerated in order to catch up with the best in class as far as digital era is concerned.
So that will mean an overhaul of our education system, because we still, to a large degree, teach children to repeat what the teacher said and write it down in the exams. We don't teach them to think creatively and critically. And isn't that essential if you're going to be successful not only in business but particularly in IT?
Definitely this is a weakness, and one of the reports that the Council is studying at the moment, or area, not a report yet, is education. Education, I have mentioned before, there is a mismatch of capabilities, and one of the mismatch that we have is the capabilities that our school children have as far as IT is concerned. And also, despite the fact that we are very, very high on university graduates percentage-wise with other countries, we are very poor on IT graduates. So we have to improve the IT, because there is a demand. So the market is there. Parents, children have to study the opportunities that they may have in the future, and IT is the sector to be.
And the other STEM topics as well, mathematics and all these sciences that again don't seem to feature very high up when you look at our education results. We spend so much on education, why aren't we getting the results that could compare with other countries?
Yeah. I think this has been recognized, and it's a positive factor that we have recognized that we have a weakness. And already the Ministry of Education, and I'm not covering for them, but I can see how it happens, that they are trying to regulate and improve on the weaknesses that they have been faced. The results of our students, sometimes they are not up to the standard that we would like them to be. So I think drastic measures have to be taken. It's not just one step or two steps forward. We have to keep running in order to be at the top of the European Union, if we want ourselves to be at the top. And I think that our aspirations are such that we cannot do otherwise. We have other problems, and education, it was one of the positive factors that Cyprus always enjoyed, so we cannot stay behind.
And let's talk about digitalising government. You look at places like Estonia, where everything is done online. Okay. It is fast, it's efficient, and we've been talking about it in Cyprus for 5, 6, 7 years, and we don't seem to be getting there, and I wonder why not. Did you look at that?
We are looking at that. Unfortunately, both government and the private sector, let's not only blame the government, but the government must do a lot in order to improve. We have the examples of Estonia and others, and the appropriate Minister for Information Technology from Estonia was here, and we have picked up on his brains as well, but it's nothing that they're hiding. We know what we have to do.
So why don't we do it?
And there is a strategic plan of how to improve at government level and the private sector. Incentives have to be given. Investments have to be made by government, heavy investments, in order to improve. Sometimes there is a reaction by the people at large when there are ways of communicating with government, with IT and computers, and people say that we have old age people, that they cannot do that, and so on. These are excuses, in my opinion. Let me take the example of filing our tax return. 3 years ago, they announced that they are going to enforce 100% filing of your tax return through the government gate. People were complaining. Nowadays, okay, they have accepted. There is a reaction. Let's ignore that reaction. Let's proceed, because there is only one way, and that way is forward as far as digital applications. The government has done a lot of improvements, but as I said before, and let me repeat it again, that the digitalization progress is an ongoing thing. It's not something that you see the goalpost and when you reach it, okay, I'm there. It doesn't. The goalpost keeps moving, and you have to catch up continually with them. Also, the private sector, they have improved. Recently, we have seen the two major banks investing heavily in information technology, and they have to. But still, there is a long way to go.
You talked about recommendations, but you also said, I think, that these are just suggestions to the government. So what are your recommendations at the moment? Because I'm sure next year they will change somewhat, depending on how things progress. And how seriously is the government taking them?
So far, we have produced 4 reports, and the government has taken them seriously, starting with the last one, which is the access to finance and equity funding, which it applied, and we have similar systems in other European countries. Even Greece, I'm saying even Greece, with its problems, they have already adopted this, and they have an equity funding scheme. Israel also, very successful. And we have suggested to the government accepted our proposal, and they are finalizing their study. And I think before the year end, there's going to be a bill going to Parliament for approval to establish an equity funding to help ideas, new startups, especially having to do with digital businesses. So they are adopting it. If they decide to ignore it, then they may have the burden of having suggestions, proposals, which are not emanating from anybody who has an interest in business or to make money, but from an independent body. And they would have to bear the cost of not adopting suggestions coming from a council that the government itself has appointed and set up. And let me also say this in addition, that when we have visited and explained the task that the Council has in Parliament, they have asked us to produce on an annual basis the recommendations made or proposed to the government by the Council, and put on the other side which suggestions, proposals you have made and have been adopted, and the suggestions that have not been adopted, because the Parliament, the Economic and Finance Committee, wants to monitor this. It goes both ways, because sometimes it's the Parliament that is to be blamed for not adopting. I was just
about to come to that. And what do you do about that?
There is nothing we can do, but this can be made public. There is nothing we are hiding behind the scenes. Everything is going out. So either the Parliament or the government have to bear the cost, the political cost, of not adopting any of the suggestions that we may propose to them.
The only problem in this populist world is that the voters, the man in the street, very often doesn't understand the impact that these sort of suggestions can have on his life or her life, because they may not be business people, but all of these things have an impact on citizens.
Correct. And our proposals and suggestions, they are not, for PhD economics. We try to make them as practical as possible for the government to adopt and for the people to understand how they will be impacting on them and in their personal lives as well.
And how will you monitor the success of what you're doing?
It's a very difficult question, but I think what I have said, that on an annual basis we would prepare a report to the Minister, what we have done, what we have proposed. In that report we plan also to have a section whereby we can tell the Minister of Finance and the government, with copy to Parliament, what suggestions have been adopted, what suggestions are in progress of being adopted, and what suggestions have been ignored altogether. So it's easy for everybody to understand and find in a tabular form what has been done and how successful the Council is by proposing and then having the changes being made by the appropriate authorities, be the government or Parliament.
And you also have to measure the impact that the adopted suggestions have had in doing what they're supposed to do. How do you measure that? Because that surely takes a little bit of time.
And sometimes this cannot be measured as such, but one could have a feeling whether it was successful or not. And let me give an example. If we suggest, for example, to reduce some form of taxation, and then we see within a year or two, because it may take some time, that there is more investment, there is more foreign investment, there is more local investment from people because of these particular measures that we have proposed and the government has adopted, then this has been a success. Whether it has been a 100% success or a 50 or a 70%, it's difficult sometimes, but one could see what we have done in 2003 by reducing the tax rate of corporates to 10%, by reducing the personal tax top rate to 30%, by increasing the untaxed amount to almost 20,000 euros. This has a tremendous benefit for the Cypriot economy, and it could not have been seen in 2003, but we had to wait for a couple of years and then see how the economy has been growing as a result of these measures.
Finally, let me ask you, you make your suggestions, and I presume that sometimes if they're to be implemented by government, for example, the financing isn't there. They can't do them all at the same time. Mm-hmm. Do you prioritise which ones are most important, and how do you prioritise? I mean, what would you personally say if we had to do only one thing, the biggest impact would be this?
We obviously take into account the cost of any proposals that we have made. We could have made a lot of proposals that we know ab initio that this cannot be enforced by government because of lack of finances. This applies to all countries. So we give our priorities, and that is why I have said before, we give practical ways of doing it. Now we are at the stage of studying the tax system of Cyprus. We know that we could suggest a lot of ways, a lot of authorities, a lot of unions, they make their proposals. But the question is, do they take into account how much this will cost to the government and how government can recover the additional costs that these measures may have? So we take into account, we give our priorities, and we are sensible that sometimes we have to wait for all the measures to be taken in a number of years and not, from day one.
Are you confident that this will have an impact?
The results so far, and it's so early, give me the grounds of being positive about the reaction of government on certain measures that we have suggested. It remains to be seen how this will be enforced later on. Another measure that we have recommended back in January was the change of what is being called the passport incentive scheme, and the government adopted the majority of the measures that we have taken. So the new scheme that the government has includes a lot of proposals which came from our report.
And that makes me want to ask you, I'm afraid, about the development boom, the high-rise boom that is really impacting a lot of people. We want to get people here to work, and they can't afford to rent a flat. And the centre of our towns and cities is changing with all these high-rise blocks that detract from the community spirit. Do you look at the social aspects as well?
Only on the outskirts of the social element. We should have been looking at that as well, in my opinion. But let's not forget our focus, and our focus is competitiveness. We would like Cyprus to be competitive for businesses. On the social aspect, if we start looking at that and see how the government or the social welfare will be working, then we are not going to be coming to a full compromise of what we have.
No, but it won't be an attractive place for people to want to come and work.
Correct.
If the social fabric is missing.
As far as that is concerned, yes, it also affects competitiveness, because if a business comes to Cyprus to invest or do establish a place of business, they don't want their employees that they're going to be coming from outside Cyprus, let's say, to find a flat or a place to live whereby they would be paying, thousands of euros per month as rent. So again, this touches the competitiveness, and this is something that we would be looking at. And we have made suggestions already to the government that they have to take the initiative of making available housing to low-income earners.
And they have started that, but how long is that going to take?
Exactly. They have started, but I think they have to accelerate, because things cannot wait. And I believe that the government has taken this very seriously. And I'm not backing the government, because I see the reaction that they have taken. They have recognized the problem, especially in Limassol, where rents are of higher level than any other city. So they must find ways, and there is always a shortage. Even in England, where I was aware of a report that there is a need for every year to build another 200 to 250,000 houses in order to satisfy the demand. And I'm not talking houses in Mayfair of the millions of pounds, but I'm talking about the average man in the street, the average secretary, small earner, to have a house.
We could go on about this for a lot longer, I'm sure, but we're about out of time. We've been talking to former Finance Minister and now Chairman of the Cyprus Economy and Competitiveness Council, I think it's called, Takis Klerides.
Thank you, Rosie.
In collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
The biggest achievement of Crime Stoppers has been the ability of the public to be able to give information about crime anonymously.
There's no way I could have kept prostituting without the drugs. There's no way I could have had my body used like a public toilet, because that's actually what prostitution is.
And then the fourth series I started 3 days after I'd won the Oscar, so the whole of the Monarch of the Glen experience was all interplatted with the Gosford Park Oscar experience.
I was working with Ronnie James Dio, and David was going to reform Whitesnake in 2003.
Cyprus was chosen because Cyprus is a stable, peaceful and secure place.
We have to really look closely. What are we doing with children? What are we doing with adolescents? And what are we doing with adults that can help them move into a more literate situation?
The ones that I'm proudest of are the ones that were true discoveries, where we found something we didn't know existed.
And in other, although connected news, the foreclosures row rumbles on. The European Central Bank has now waded in and said that any changes to the foreclosures law, as suggested by Parliament, would have a significant negative impact on the island's banking system. The big problem for the banks, of course, is that in Cyprus it's something like 34.1% of loans. That compares with the EU average of just 3.1%. Last week, President Anastasiades vetoed the bill. It's gone back now to Parliament, and MPs were discussing earlier this week whether to accept the President's veto, which would put the matter to bed, or reject it and leave it to the Supreme Court to have the final say. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.